Good morning. Today is the last Sunday after the Epiphany, as well as that other celebration that some of you may be looking forward to today. I will try not to be too long here so you can get started on any pressing matters that you may have planned for today after you eat pancakes, of course. If you feel like the season of Epiphany has been short, your feelings would be correct, as Lent comes early this year. And although it has been a short season, a great deal has happened in our parish, in our diocese, and in the lectionary. Within our congregation, we have had many celebrations and, sadly, several losses. We have had our annual meeting and rolled out our strategic plan for the future. We have welcomed new vestry members and honored those who have served. In the diocese during this period, we have celebrated the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., ordained 3 new transitional deacons, and celebrated Absalom Jones. We have identified the transition and consecration committees in support of the election of a new bishop at the 2024 convention. A lot has happened during Epiphany. All these occurrences seem to go in order and are understandable. However, because Epiphany is shorter, you may have had a bit of confusion from last week's readings to this week's readings. That is because there could be up to 4 more weeks of Epiphany that we do not have this year in our lectionary. We have continued in the Gospel of Mark. As you might recall, Mark is generally believed to be the earliest gospel. And as the earliest gospel, you can see similarities from Mark in the stories of the other 3 gospels. In the case of the Transfiguration, which is also in Matthew and Luke, the Transfiguration is just the same as in the other 2. The before and after may be a little bit different, but the telling of the Transfiguration is the same, which is interesting when you realize that the Gospels were all originally oral narratives. The Transfiguration was so important that no one dared change it. So what did we miss in Epiphany that we may have another year when Lent doesn't come so soon? We do hear these scriptures at other times during the year, but I think it may help to have some context for today's gospel. Last week, Jesus exorcised an unclean spirit in the synagogue at Capernaum and healed Simon's mother-in-law from a fever. The crowds noted that it was a new teaching with authority, that he commanded the unclean spirits. And this was in public, so Jesus couldn't keep it quiet. What we would have heard next in Mark was Jesus healing a person with leprosy, who he gives a stern warning to tell no one, which the healed man promptly ignores. Jesus heals a great many individuals in public as well, and is challenged by the Pharisees and scribes by his healing and his declaring sins forgiven, and his association with tax collectors and sinners. According to the Pharisees and scribes, only God can give forgiveness of sins. And who is this Jesus to be God? Jesus stills the storm, restores a young girl to life, and many more miracles, which lead right up to before our reading today. Jesus has been acknowledged by Peter as the Messiah and has been told, along with the other disciples, and has told along with the other disciples, to tell no one, just as he's been telling so many other people. It is not yet God's timing. Jesus then teaches the disciples that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be killed and will rise again after 3 days. This is so upsetting to Peter that doubt and fear overcome him, and he rebukes Jesus. Jesus responds to Peter, saying that he has been filled by Satan because he is setting his mind on human things rather than on divine things, which I think that we can all relate to. Jesus shares with the crowd and his disciples, if anyone wants to become his disciple, they must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow him. 6 days, which is very exact and connected to the Old Testament, after Jesus has foretold his suffering and death, and Peter has been so upset, he leads Peter, James, and John up a high mountain away from everyone else and is transfigured before them, his clothes becoming blindingly white. Elijah and Moses also appear, representing the law and the prophets, and begin to speak with Jesus. Peter, James, and John, imagine yourself as them, stunned, terrified, asking each other, what is going on? So what do? They want to do something, just as we would probably want to do something. They want to build dwellings, which in some translations, the word dwelling is identified as tabernacles or tents, which was a Greek tradition to build a shrine on the site of the Epiphany, the light of a deity. Rather than be in the moment, knowing they were in the presence of the divine, they want to do something. What is our modern day version of this situation? The first thing that I thought of was that we would want to take a picture. We would want to capture the memory. I can just see the 3 disciples, too, standing there sizing up how big the tents would be. Can you imagine? So while they are figuring this out, a cloud envelops them, and they hear God's voice saying, "Stop, listen, listen, this is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him." If there was any doubt about who Jesus was, that doubt is gone. And what is the next thing that we in 2024 would want to do after this experience, after experiencing a miracle? After we took the pictures so that we could capture the moment, we would want to show the pictures to everyone and tell everyone about all that we had seen and heard. We would want to process what just happened and ask ourselves over again, what does all this mean? Is it Jesus showing Peter, James, and John that he will rise again as Moses and Elijah were risen on the mountaintop? Is it Jesus revealing his divinity to these 3 so that they will once and for all understand who he is? Then, once again, like so many other times, Jesus says, "Tell no one until the Son of Man has risen from the dead." As the 4 men are walking back down the mountain, and Moses and Elijah have disappeared along with the cloud, of God's presence. Jesus is once again the Jesus as the disciples knew him. How do you think Peter, James, and John see Jesus now? He is still filled with the glory of God, as he always was, just as we have the glory of God within our hearts through the light and grace of Jesus Christ. Do we see that grace in others when we look at them? Or do we just see their faces and their outward appearance? Do we see the glory of God within them? We can see the light of the Epiphany, the bright star which led the way, the dazzling brightness of Jesus on the mountaintop. We are transformed as well with Christ in our hearts. In our transformation, let us carry the light of Christ with us through this next holy season. Let us see Christ's light in others as we begin our 40-day period of reflection and renewal and prayer. Let us carry Christ's light and not be distressed, but become closer to God. Be as the healed leper and share the good news with all that we meet. Be the light and shine a reflection towards others so that they may know the love of God in Jesus Christ.